life goes through phases, sort of like the moon does. When you get grapefruit in a can, make sure it doesn't have sugar. You don't need extra sugar.
Sugar.
Anyway, as I was saying, life moves through phases. You won't know that you're in a phase when you're in the phase, but when the phase ends, you'll know that it happened. Cut the sharp point off, just to be safe. It's nice to have a junky pair of shears for, you know, stuff like this. One way to measure the phases in your life is to recount them based on the car that you drove at the time. Because a car isn't permanent. It represents a sort of distinct, quantifiable time period that will have its own unique characteristics. For example, there was a time period during which I drove a little blue Tempo, and I was distinctly different than the person that I am now. Another way to recount those time periods, or those distinct chapters in your life, is to recount who was your best friend at the time. Who comes to mind when I say that? Best friend. Who's your best friend? One or two people spring to mind when I say that, depending on which chapter of my life I'm thinking about. But my first real best friend, well, he and I used to make these when we were kids. I want it to be less than 1.5 inches. I think 1.5 inches is a little bit on the tall side. Let's aim down a little bit lower. Something like this. Well, we would make these to stay warm. And so to this day, I won't even waste a scrap of wax. Still, you know, in one of my chapters in life, I was pretty poor. Really poor. Poor enough to have been hungry. And to this day, I don't waste food because of it. You know, life can teach you some hard lessons about frugality. Moll Flanders's prayer was, "Give me not poverty, lest I steal." And I totally understand that. Because if you haven't been forced to steal, count yourself lucky. If you haven't been so cold that you'll do anything to stay warm, definitely count yourself lucky. But one of these, you don't have to be completely destitute in order to make one of these. I mean, though you can make one with virtually no expense, it can also be one of life's simple joys. We want it to be about 1.25 inches. It's been many years, at least 20 years, since I've seen my old best friend. And I guess I miss him. I haven't heard of him in a long time. Last I heard, he was living in Sudan. What's he doing out there? I mean, we're from the woods of Pennsylvania. What's he doing in Sudan? I guess demonstrating that he's more idealistic than I am. Very important that you do this part right. You'll want to cut it so that the corrugated part is running up and down. Think of it as kind of like little vertical flue pipes, little chimneys. It will also help it so that you can wrap it into a circle. Cardboard likes to bend one way, but not the other. Let's make a couple of these. All these years later though, and I still can't help but think about my old best friend. Things that we said to one another. It's incredible that early life still affects you. Way down the road. We're very impressionable. Mostly who we are, who we become, is a reaction. Of course, there's our genetics, our nature makes us what we are initially. But so much of that is a direct response to our environment. Our nature doesn't really express in a vacuum. Nature can only express within a context. Nurture, environment. Had I been put somewhere else with the same nature, I would have been something else. I know you can tell me about all those identical twin studies, but that's not the subject here today. Now, if you're just a kid who's trying to keep his cabin warm in the woods, you won't do this, but filing all the sharp bits off is pretty nice. If you don't have a file, though, you can just let the cardboard stick up proud a little bit, and then you're very unlikely to cut yourself. Of course, you can avoid the problem altogether by just using a tuna can, but I don't eat the stuff. Sandpaper might work too, but be super careful with your fingers if you try that. Now we just coil these cardboard strips up into a big long spiral. And you don't have to do this. In fact, I've never done it before in my life, but now's a good time to try. I'm going to take the paper part, throw it away, and I'm going to try one of them that just uses this. I'm hoping it will bend a little easier and make the tubes stay a little cleaner. So we'll try one of these, and we'll try a control group that just uses normal cardboard. We'll test them at the end and see if it makes a difference. Wow, sure does coil up nicer, I'll tell you that. Never had one that worked that well. Funny how all these years later and I can still learn things. We'll see how it goes. Man, cardboard's an underrated material. Gets a bad rap because it's so wasteful to throw it away. But man, stop and consider what life would be like without it. It's pretty awesome stuff. Wow, it wraps even easier if we have the tubules to the outside. I guess that's because the paper doesn't end up in tension. But it's kind of smashing the cells in the interior. So I'll leave this one on the outside, like so. And then the other ones I'll do this way. Looks like I need one more. Line up end to end. Let it unspool. And now size it to fit. We don't want it too tight. I have to remove a little bit still. We'll inch up on it. Trial and error. Don't take too much. That's a nice fit. This is just what we want. Open cells everywhere, nothing smashed, and the top cardboard is proud, so you're not likely to get cut on the top. Here's the control for comparison. Just a regular piece of cardboard. You can see it's much more difficult to get it to spool up, and you end up with these little triangular spaces. But don't worry, it will still work. just won't bend as neatly. On to the next step.
Wax. That's our fuel. And it doesn't really matter what kind, because a fire pot like this is rather forgiving. And also keep in mind that I intend for you to use this outside. That's why we're using these scented candles, because they would otherwise be a waste product. It's something that ends up a residual leftover in all of our household candles. And it's not the perfect fuel by any means. I'd rather use paraffin, but that's becoming increasingly difficult to find anymore. And remember, part of our theme here is frugality today. But during this process, hopefully some of the scent will burn off, and what doesn't, that's okay, because the intention is to use these burners outside. But scented wax does have a tendency to shrink differently than normal paraffin does, and this is a problem that you'll better understand later in the video.
You can tell that the reason this candle probably failed was that it had burned away before, and into the hole I stuck a votive. Maybe my candle thrift is a little bit excessive. You have to wonder when you're pressing down on a knife just how important the cut that you're making is. How much are you willing to risk? And I say this with some irony, but I didn't do this cutting wax, I did it cutting cardboard. So I did this for you. This is our crucible, and we're not picky. Any wax we can find will work. We can even leave those discs in and pieces of wick, because once it's liquefied, it will all come out. If you're going on a trip, and like a camping trip, and you're going to take some of these with you, take a couple chunks of wax with you, because they can be added to it later as fuel. While it's burning, you just add a couple chunks to it, like this. For my part, this is somewhat of a novelty now, and not much is at stake, but if I were outside and really it mattered to me, I would probably avoid these scented waxes as much as I can. They're often softer, just not as good of a fuel. Ideally, you want to use just pure white paraffin. And when I was a kid, and we were trying to stay warm on a camping trip in our cabin all night long, I would only burn pure paraffin. In fact, I used to buy it in big blocks and then carve it into little ice cubes with my knife and add it as I mentioned. Some of my buddy burners were several years old and in use quite a bit. Once your crucible is filled, I think that should be enough for two. Well, then we're ready to heat it up. You could use a heat gun, but that will take forever. You could use a stove. That's a little bit messy and a little bit dangerous. You could set it by a campfire on a stone. That would be a pretty good way to do it. But I'm going to do it the easiest way of all, because it's February and I'm in a shop with a wood burner. So today it's as simple as this. We'll give it about a half hour or so, and that's a nice side effect. It boils away a lot of those aromatics, which is pleasant in here, but it gets a bit strong. You can even control and slow the heat transfer by putting something there to allow a slight air cushion between it. Especially helpful if you're using it with glass, because glass can thermal shock if you heat it up too quickly. That means crack. Back at the beginning, I was lecturing you about waste not, want not, and you've probably thrown out one or two of these candle things. They get all sorts of wax in them and they stop burning well. You can do this. Take the lid off, it will liquefy. Just baby it, stir it as it melts, and you'll be able to pour it all out. Once there's just a film on the inside, how do you get rid of the film of wax in a hot piece of glass? Sawdust. Sawdust will absorb the hot wax and you'll be able to dump it out and it will be clean as a whistle.
Saturate all the cardboard. Leave no dry spots. Once the wax has solidified, these should be totally waterproof.
Try not to overfill them. You want to look down in there and see it about 1/8 or 1/4 inch below. If they are overfilled, it will just be harder to get them lit. All the junk, the wick and the debris and stuff, it will just hang out on the bottom of this can. It's actually pretty easy to separate it. But considering their purpose, it doesn't matter even if junk were to get inside of this. If it's flammable, it will become wick, and if it's inflammable, it will just become filler. We'll let them cool slowly, because if wax cools too quickly, it shrinks. Not like it matters much in this case, but it's just good form with candle making to cool wax slowly. And of course, all this stuff can be reused for next time. Not like I need to, but we're doing apple spice today, not vanilla. That's another day. Okay, refinement. I heated this up again, and we're just going to pour it off gently to get the wax off of the top. Wax is really lightweight, and most of the debris will stay down in there. And while it's still warm, we'll absorb it, like this. Different grades of sawdust will have different properties. Coarse stuff like this, it's more abrasive. You can use it to scour a mess. Finer stuff is more absorbent. The stuff that's in your bag from your miter box, that's really fine. That would be good for this. But if you have an oil spill in your garage, probably want to use jointer or planer shavings. What's in the beaker is just nice, clean, pure wax. Now that they've cooled, take a peek down inside and you can definitely tell how bad that flavored wax shrinks. Trust me when I say that paraffin doesn't do this, at least not as badly. But we'll just top it off by adding a little more. As I've said, ideally we want wax that's about 1/8 of an inch down from the top. And that way you can think of these burners as being just like candles, and the cardboard is, well, the wick. And also, just like candles, these require a certain degree of maintenance. If you just let them go, that is, if you just burn, and it would probably take about 2 or 3 hours before this burns to nothing if you don't add fuel. If you were to do that, you'll burn out the cardboard and you'll have to replace it. And so when using these, you just want to get into the habit of trying to keep the wax level up near the top. If you do that, you can preserve the wick virtually indefinitely. Here's one of my old tuna can models. Tuna cans have a bigger diameter than a regular can, and so they'll burn a little more fuel, something to note. But it's also a little hardier, a little more traditional. This one is many, many years old, as are these. This one, even the date, the canned good went bad over a decade ago, so these can last for a very long time. Also, make in pairs because one acts as a snuffer for the other. And also because accidents happen, and it's very often the case that one will get spilled. It just happens. And if you spill it and all the fuel is gone, it will burn out quickly. And so it's nice to have a backup. Before testing these, we will wait for them to cool. And in the meantime, I would like to remind you, remember what I said about cold shrinking wax really quickly? We can use that to our advantage, especially if the container has smooth walls. Here we are, ready to try them out. All of life, or at least most of it, ends up being a struggle to achieve mastery over one's environment. And so when you're a kid, you're born into the world having relatively no power over the environment. My foot just slipped into the creek, so I'm feeling a little bit that way now. We have very little affect over our environment as kids, and it starts to become downright disheartening. Editor's note, and you guys know that I don't fill my videos with excuses or apologies, but every morning I come out here and make a fire. And I use a single match. Very rarely do I ever struggle with it. So what was my problem yesterday? You'd never guess. Same brand of matches, but these little ones in this little box are comparatively weaker. I mean, like seriously, don't use the little matches. Get the big wooden thick matches. It made for great video though. I mean, come on, I'm acting like I'm some kind of experienced woodsman and I can't even get my buddy burner to light. Well, here's what we're gonna do because I'm not using these ever again. This is the strike plate from a different box. We can store that in there, and we'll add real matches. Much better. Never again. And so you can learn to make one, and so learning to make one of these can really be satisfying when you're young, because, well, it's empowering to begin to be able to modify your environment such that it suits your goals, your desires. The environment outside it's impartial, and it's been rough on humanity through most of our history. And so we nurture this little tiny spark and eventually grow to exert a lot of control over our environment, eventually becoming comfortable and mastering it. And that's kind of the essence of what this otherwise Sisyphean endeavor is all about. Boy, conditions are not making this easy. Probably should have brought a lighter. But it's a good demonstration. Even in the wind, these things are reliable. Oh, the scent. It's really not overpowering. I expected it to be, but virtually nothing. The wind is carrying most of it away, but I mean, I can just detect a little bit. Wow, who would have thought that I'd have so much trouble transferring fire from one to another? There we go. It's starting. Look, it's jumping over. Kind of. I should note, it's been a while, but I can still remember that they're easier to start once after their maiden voyage. First one's hard to get them to go. Later, once they're blackened, they become easier to wake up. And with that, I think we're up and running. Well, it's hard for me to tell if there's a difference between the two because of the wind. So far as I can tell, as long as you get cardboard and wax in there, it's going to be just fine. And just fine it is. It's lovely. So, here's to old buddies. I hope you can find one and keep one. And as for mine, that's the only one I have left. He's around here somewhere. She, though. There she is. Come here. Hopefully you can find an old buddy to go burn one with. They made a nice hand warmer on the way up. This one was burned for longer, but I also spilled it off camera a little bit. And this one, it doesn't even look like I used much fuel. They can have a long life. See ya.